Hello, everybody. My name is Phoenix, and after some time away, I'm once again here to talk to you about the Singularity. Before I even go into this, I wanted to make a pretty massive disclaimer here. I know I have mutuals who have the mindset that I'm about to talk about, and no, this is not meant to rag on anyone, or to make anybody feel bad, or to invalidate anybody's feelings. I love my fellow Singularity enjoyers, and we need more of them in a world where he still has a tragically low pick rate. Just because I feel a certain way and want to vent about it doesn't mean I don't respect others who hold a different opinion than myself. I made a rant video in the past when Singularity's changes hit the PTB and the 8.1.0 patch, and it's not the content I really like or enjoy making, but this has been on my mind for a while, and I kind of just wanted to talk about it. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of talk for the past several months about how the changes turned Singularity into a quote unquote brainless killer, how they dumbed him down and lowered the killer's skill ceiling. I'm gonna be honest, I simply don't believe or agree with this sentiment. I still hold the belief that Singularity has a very steep learning curve, more so than a lot of the killers on the roster, and the changes that he received over a year ago at this point achieved what the devs wanted for the killer to make him easier to play on a basic and fundamental level, and to make him feel much less janky for controller users, and to make his learning curve not so punishing for the casual gamers in an attempt to raise his pick rate. While I can't speak for everyone, from what I've personally seen, is the people that take the most issue with the changes are the people that already played Singularity prior to the rework and had already put in the time, the effort, the blood, the sweat, and the tears into learning the killer in his more difficult and janky state. They understand how powerful the killer already was once mastered. And I agree with this mindset. Singularity has always been considered a mid to high A tier killer, even considered S tier by some, though he has always historically suffered from an extremely low pick rate and lack of appreciation from the majority of the community. I don't know if the veteran players feel some sort of sunken cost fallacy, as in their efforts were wasted when the killer was changed to be easier for the people that didn't appreciate him before, creating this little shadow community of players that understood the killer, a feeling of camaraderie between those that loved a niche but strong character, maybe feeling that sense of tribalism going away to make the killer cater to a more widespread player base felt bad. Or maybe they genuinely just feel like the killer has too much strength in his current state for the lower level of effort that he now requires. Previously, I did call this gatekeeping or a sort of elitism, and that may have been too harsh. I understand the frustration of these players, even if I don't agree or share that frustration. And I know this doesn't describe everybody's issue with the changes. I'm simply trying to understand why people feel the way that they do when I don't necessarily feel the same. I don't pretend to understand psychology or the human brain. I'm just trying to make sense of things. Anyways, the changes themselves, at least to me, don't seem like they buffed the parts of his kit that were already strong. The way I interpret strength and skill expression is with a defined floor and a defined ceiling, as if visualizing a room in a house. The floor being the lowest, most basic requirements that you need to play the killer somewhat competently. This is what you should strive for when learning a new killer. You're not an expert, you don't win every game, and that's okay. You're just working on your grasp of the power, how to use it, and understand it. For Singularity, this is mostly his mechanical components. When and how to place biopods, being able to consistently tag survivors with slipstream, being able to aim and land your teleport with your M2 ability, and not constantly misfire pods all over the map. Learning how good overclock is for creating dead zones and shredding through pallets. Then, once you understand the basics, you start working your way up to the theoretical skill ceiling. This is absolute mastery of the killer. You know all the niche things to do with the power and can apply them consistently in your games. I don't consider myself at this level by any means, but I can identify what it looks like. This is mostly Singularity's macro skill set, and I consider there to be much more to this skill set than at the proverbial floor. You know where everybody is at all times. You know which EMP crates they spawn next to and can stop them from printing early game. You know the crate generation on most or all of the maps. You know when to tag and rotate to different survivors. You have people slipstreamed most of the game, and you know how to optimize your biopod placement in a way that makes it extremely difficult for survivors to avoid being tagged. You know the exact second you need to teleport with your M2 to secure a hit using the chain ball mechanic, and you know when to fake teleport with your camera and when to fully commit to the teleport. You understand how teleport feathering works. You are extremely lethal in chase, and you can secure downs very quickly using all of the above resources, and knowing how to combine camera mind games, teleporting at the right time, and utilizing overclock to play around almost all of the tiles in the game. You understand how much of a powerhouse Singularity is at slugging, and how quickly he can snowball even a very good team. And you know when and how to play aggressively or defensively. These are all skills that come with time and practice. The learning curve, if you will, as you start to elevate your gameplay from the skill floor towards the skill ceiling. The changes made to Singularity, I believe, aimed to make this learning curve less punishing and easier to achieve by lowering the amount of effort required to reach the skill floor. Players can start to work towards honing their skills and giving themselves a new goal of killer mastery. There used to be a running joke amongst the community prior to the Singularity changes that he required more effort than any other killer in the game, and that you basically had to be a computer yourself to play the killer. And no one played him because of how difficult he was perceived to be. And when the changes weren't introduced, there were many players that were excited that they could finally play the Singularity, and this was especially true for console players. So, why the animosity towards him over a year after these changes came to live servers? I'd like to go over the changes that I think had the most impact on his gameplay and community perception, and why I believe Singularity's strength was not altered hardly at all, and how his capabilities were more or less completely unchanged. Let's address the most controversial topic of the changes, the auto aim. In the 8.1.0 patch, Singularity received 3 different kinds of aim assistance to his kit, the most minor being an aim assist on placing his biopods in the environment. This was a quality of life change that prevented him from losing out on a pod placement due to Dead by Daylight's janky nature.
I just want to goop you. I just want to goop you. Dude, place the
Sometimes you aim a pixel too high and wouldn't get the biopod placed down, and the game would register it as being in a quote unquote forbidden area. This can still happen, but I do notice it much less nowadays. This is ultimately time saved in a game that's all about time management. This did alter the feeling of placing biopods down slightly, making them feel a little bit more sticky as they snap onto the automatically detected possible quote unquote location, almost like a grid snapping mechanism. Some people feel as if this took some of the control of placing biopods down exactly where they wanted them, but I would argue that a biopod placed 2 pixels to the left of your ideal spot will most likely not affect your gameplay. This is just from my own experience, but this hasn't really been a hindrance at all in my own games, and ultimately is meant to make him feel better by alleviating a minor inconvenience his old kit had. Fixing a character's jank in favor of a smoother gameplay experience is not taking anything away from his skill expression, I'm sorry to say. And ultimately, his pod placement can still be optimized, even though the game tries to autocorrect how you place them down. Placing biopods around the map and in the environment is one of the main components of his skill floor and basic requirements, and this was simply made to be slightly easier and less frustrating. The second version of aim assist that the Singularity got was actually aiming his gun arm to manually teleport to a slipstream survivor with his M2 ability. This is, from what I've seen, the biggest complaint from experienced Singularity players. This makes locking onto survivors easier, and one of the biggest reasons he feels quote unquote dumbed down. This is another change that was fairly minor and was geared towards controller players and players who have difficulty aiming, while also preventing you from spamming oops pods while trying to teleport to a survivor. It was designed to alleviate a pain point in his kit, making him more accessible and not having to think too much about the actual act of teleporting. And while it does make his mechanical requirements much easier, you still have to know when to teleport in a way that won't lose you distance. I can understand how it would feel clunky for people who are already comfortable with the killer, but ultimately I don't believe it alters his strength other than getting teleports that you might have missed prior to the changes. A teleport doesn't guarantee death, however. If you hit a teleport that guarantees a survivor getting hit, that is not because of the aim assist giving it to you. It's because you had good decision making as a player and knew how to execute the teleport in a way that was advantageous to you, either through manipulating the chain ball or because you had the game sense to know it was a good idea. Or maybe you're like me and you just try shit until it works. Either way, aim assist on the M2 was not a game changer for Singularity. Players on mouse and keyboard already had the accuracy and aim training through practice to hit those teleports anyways. And as a good friend of mine puts it, no one is watching a Singularity clip and thinking to themselves, man, that teleport was so good and skillful. But the mind games leading up to the actual teleport are impressive and skillful and showcase the player's skill expression much more accurately. The only thing I'd maybe change about this, similar to the next thing I'll talk about, is making this an optional feature for those who prefer not to use it, as the main point of contention is that this is a feature that was forced on players that ultimately don't like how it feels, which is completely understandable, but not super impactful to what makes Singularity a strong killer. The final bit of auto aim that Singularity was given was auto lock on his biopods. This is something I've talked about before, so I'll be brief, but the way the devs handled this part of the buffs was done very well. It is an optional feature that helps those with lower sensitivity play on the same level as PC players, which is fine and a good way to bridge the gap. So far, I haven't really seen too many people complaining about this in particular since it was fixed from the PTB, and it's completely fine as is. Prior to 8.1.0, the add-on Soma Family Photo had a very different effect from what it does currently. Singularity did not always have haste and overclock, and he could only achieve it using an add-on, the previous version of Soma Family Photo, which granted him 5% haste and overclock, and was widely considered to be a must-have add-on, so much that the devs decided to incorporate it into his base kit, but toned down the value to 3% instead of 5%. Having haste and overclock was something that made up for the killer's shortcomings, as he felt extremely clunky to play without it, and was prone to being W-keyed. With no real way to play around tiles, except for to utilize the chain ball, which not everybody does. By the time you teleported and got up to maximum speed, the survivors could make a lot of distance on you. Soma alleviated that frustration and was by far his most picked add-on, so the devs reworked the add-on and gave him a little bit of haste base kit, which helped him feel more fluid in chase without compromising a permanent add-on slot, giving him more variety in what he can use and play around with different builds a bit more. I'll be honest, this was a buff. There's no beating around the bush about it. This was a straight up buff to his base kit. However, I wouldn't say this makes the killer brain dead or watered down either. I wouldn't say having it removes any skill expression of the killer. Old Soma Family Photo gave you 5% haste, which you could pair with a Xenomorph's perk, Rapid Brutality, to gain a whopping 10% haste in overclock. So you were quite literally a machine in chase. This combo was actually nerfed by incorporating it into his base kit, as Soma no longer grants haste, and rapid brutality will give you 8% at max as of right now. Still strong, but not as strong as the previous combination. The point is, nothing changed with this. In fact, most people were outright asking for the haste to be base kit, and people were already utilizing what made it strong prior to the changes. People were using haste before, and now they can continue to use haste but have other add-ons at the same time, while nerfing the combo all around. As for current Soma family photo, I've made a whole video about my thoughts on the add-on, but the short version is it's extremely powerful and should probably be reworked again. It promotes tunneling and is astronomically oppressive in the right situation. This is one change that I agree was too much and still remains as one of his strongest add-ons, and I'd love for this one to go back to the drawing board. There is one part of the changes that, while I don't think it takes away from Singularity's overall strength, it does take away slightly from his skill expression. Old Singularity used to have a passive ability where his overclock was extended by 1 second for every survivor that he had tagged with the slipstream, starting with a base duration of 4.7 seconds and scaled up to a maximum of 8.7 seconds without add-ons, and was given a flat number of 5.7s of overclock post rework. This passive was never stated anywhere in his power description, and to be honest, you only knew it was a thing if you realized it during gameplay, read through the wiki, or heard it from somebody else. It was a nice little reward for splitting pressure, but let's be honest, the vast majority of players, including survivors, had no idea how this worked. While I am disappointed that it was removed, I understand it was to make him easier to comprehend from a survivor's standpoint. They have no idea why your overclock was 10 seconds long, but it may have been only 6 seconds before. Even so, in my personal opinion, Singularity benefits from a shorter overclock anyways, simply because it allows you to initiate another teleport in rapid succession. I feel like the main part of having the scaling overclock was to encourage and reward players for tagging multiple people at once with Slipstream, although realistically you should be doing this anyway. Whether or not you get anything out of it, since this is how he plays the macro game and applies pressure in the 4v1. Again, this is a part of his kit that was unchanged, and his gameplay is exactly the same, you just get slightly less out of it on terms of a bonus for playing well. Having overall less overclock also hinders his ability to bulldoze through the pallets and resources on the map to create massive dead zones, something he is currently still very good at regardless. Singularity has always been a macro-focused killer who excels at splitting pressure across multiple survivors at once and controlling large portions of the map. While he may not be as heavily rewarded for it, his macro skill ceiling is untouched by having this passive removed. Anything you could do to pressure the survivors still holds true to his current state. Speaking of macro, let's discuss something I actually don't like about the changes. For the most part, everything about them has served a purpose, helped the killer feel less janky and smoother to play, or made him easier to pick up and play, and made him a little bit more casual player friendly. There is one change, however, I think most Singularity players are in agreement with, and that is the addition of Killer Instinct on Slipstream. In my personal opinion, this change is the biggest offender for making Singularity feel more quote unquote brainless, and unfortunately, I don't see many people bringing it up. If Singularity tags a survivor with Slipstream from a biopod, you get Killer Instinct on the survivor for a few seconds. This change I am 100% okay with, and actually appreciate, as it helps me with orienting myself after exiting a biopod. But you will also get Killer Instinct if the survivors spread the slipstream to each other by getting too close to one another. This change does single-handedly make his macro gameplay and game awareness much easier. It also makes one of his add-ons, the Crew Manifest, completely obsolete, as there's no real reason to run an aura add-on when you have Killer Instinct. Killer Instinct has no counter. It can't be hidden by Distortion or Calm Spirit. This also makes another one of his add-ons, Live Wires, which causes survivors to scream when they cleanse themselves of the slipstream with an EMP extremely strong, and puts survivors into a lose-lose situation. Imagine this scenario. You have everybody on the team injured. You tag one survivor with Slipstream and rotate away from them. They run to their teammates to be healed before grabbing an EMP, and as a result, spread the Slipstream to their teammates by getting too close. You get Killer Instinct on that group, and you now know where at least 2 or maybe 3 survivors are, where they're resetting, possibly which gens they're actively working on, and if your crate knowledge is good, you know which EMP crate they're closest to. You, as the Singularity, can walk or teleport to them if you have a biopod in range, and can snowball by slugging for this single mistake. So, survivors should, in theory, EMP themselves before they heal, right? This is where Livewire shines. If they cleanse first, they scream and reveal their location to you. If they don't cleanse, they risk giving away their entire team. The knowledge this change gives you is insane, and the killer instinct on spreading in particular, just in my opinion, absolutely needs to go. This is just one possible scenario where it can actually win you games. It takes away from the macro game and makes decision making that much easier. I would absolutely be okay if this change got reverted, but in tandem with everything else, this is probably the most egregious out of everything he received. Even so, I still wouldn't even think of calling Singularity brainless, devoid of skill expression, or anything of the like. For the most part, he is exactly the same as he once was. It's just that more people are inclined to play him and get better with him than they were before, now that reaching his initial skill floor is not like pulling teeth getting through all of the jank. Reaching his skill ceiling is still challenging. There's still a lot to learn and to master. He is still a more demanding killer than a lot of the other killers on the roster. The things he is currently good at, he already was, just much more difficult. And in my opinion, it's okay to make a killer easier to learn for the majority of the population. It's okay to try and make him easier to understand for a more broad player base. The parts of his kit that made him skillful are still there. It's just that there's a wider audience trying to reach the same standards. There are some things that are too much, as stated, but for the most part, Singularity has not been dumbed down or butchered. I feel like so many players have been extremely doomer about Singularity, and frankly, it makes me sad. Because I always enjoyed being part of a community that liked a niche killer, and just because he's not as niche as before, isn't any reason to be so abrasive. As for more recent reworks, I think it's unfair to compare them to Singularity, when some of the reworks we've seen have been downright abysmal. His were more focused on his overall quality of life and ease of use. While this is all just based on my opinion and my experiences playing the killer, I wanted to put in my 2 cents because I do love the killer and I feel like I advocated loudly for the changes initially, and I still don't regret it at all. If you made it this far, I do appreciate you sticking around and listening to me ramble. I hope it makes enough sense, and if you haven't tried to play Singularity, this is your opportunity. Don't be discouraged by the negativity. The DBD community is full of it, and we should all try and be a little bit better. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you for watching.